31 years. That's how long Marcus Washington had wondered what happened during his wife's final doctor's appointment. 31 years of searching, of sleepless nights, of building a nursery that would never be used. On a cold morning in January 2024, a demolition crew would finally answer his questions and reveal a medical conspiracy so horrific it would shake an entire city. Keisha Washington had always dreamed of being a mother. At 28, she was radiant in her 8th month of pregnancy, her hands constantly resting on her rounded belly as she felt their baby move. She and Marcus had been trying for 3 years, through heartbreak and hope, through fertility treatments and countless prayers at Mount Olive Baptist Church. Marcus, 31, worked double shifts at the Ford plant to save money for the baby. They'd bought a small house in Detroit's Brightmoor neighborhood, spending weekends painting the nursery a cheerful yellow. "I want to be surprised," Keisha would say, running her hands over her belly. "Boy or girl, this baby is already perfect. Before we dive into this incredible story, I'd love to know, where are you listening from today? Whether you're at home, commuting, or anywhere in between, please share in the comments. It's wonderful connecting with all of you through these stories, and I truly appreciate you being here." Their love story had begun at Wayne State University, where Keisha studied elementary education and Marcus pursued mechanical engineering. They married in 1990, 3 years after graduation, in a ceremony that filled Mount Olive with joy and gospel music. Keisha's mother, Dorothy Williams, had sewn her wedding dress by hand. Marcus's father, Samuel Washington, walked them both down the aisle after Keisha's own father passed away the year before. The pregnancy had been textbook perfect. Keisha glowed with health, attending every appointment religiously, reading pregnancy books late into the night. She'd already chosen names: Amara for a girl, meaning eternal in Igbo, honoring her grandmother's heritage, and Malik for a boy, meaning king. Dr. Harrison Webb at Riverside Medical Center had been recommended by Keisha's best friend, Jasmine Thompson, who delivered her twins there the previous year. Dr. Webb was known throughout Detroit's Black community as a caring physician who treated his patients with respect, a rarity in a healthcare system that often failed women who looked like Keisha. "He actually listens," Jasmine had told her, "and he makes sure you understand everything. You'll love him." October 15th, 1993, dawned crisp and bright. Marcus had requested the day off from Ford to drive Keisha to her appointment, their last regular checkup before the baby's arrival. They'd planned to stop for lunch afterward at their favorite soul food restaurant, then pick up the crib they'd been paying for in installments. "I can feel the baby dancing in there." Keisha laughed as they drove through Detroit's morning traffic. "Little one knows something special is happening today." Marcus squeezed her hand. "Dr. Webb said next week we might talk about inducing labor. Can you believe it? Next week we could be holding our baby." They'd waited so long for this moment. 3 miscarriages in their first years of marriage had tested their faith and their marriage. Keisha had blamed herself, despite Marcus's constant reassurance. When this pregnancy reached the 6-month mark, they'd finally allowed themselves to hope. At Riverside Medical Center, Marcus helped Keisha out of their used Honda Civic, his hand supporting her back. She wore a flowing purple maternity dress that her mother had made, with comfortable shoes and the gold cross necklace Marcus had given her for their first anniversary. "See you in about an hour, baby," Marcus said, kissing her forehead in the hospital parking lot. He'd brought a book to read while waiting, a parenting guide they'd been studying together. "Maybe Dr. Webb will let us hear the heartbeat again," Keisha said, her eyes bright with anticipation. "I never get tired of that sound." She walked through the glass doors of a Riverside Medical Center at exactly 2:10 p.m., her hand protectively cradling her belly. The security camera at the entrance captured her smile, her confident stride, the way she paused to hold the door for an elderly man with a walker. It was the last time Marcus would see his wife alive. Marcus waited in the parking lot, reading his book and occasionally glancing at the hospital entrance. 1 hour passed, then 2. By 4:30 p.m., anxiety gnawed at his stomach. Keisha's appointments never lasted more than an hour, usually less. He entered the hospital lobby and approached the reception desk, where a tired-looking white woman with graying hair barely looked up from her paperwork. "Excuse me, I'm waiting for my wife, Keisha Washington. She had a 2:15 appointment with Dr. Webb." It's been over 2 hours. The receptionist, whose name tag read Margaret, frowned at her computer screen. Washington? Washington? I don't show anyone by that name checked in today. That's impossible, Marcus said, his voice rising. I watched her walk in here. She's 8 months pregnant, wearing a purple dress. Someone had to see her? Margaret called over her supervisor, a stern-faced man in his 50s named Richard Henley. Sir, sometimes patients change their minds, decide not to wait. Your wife might have left through another exit. Without telling me? Without her appointment? That doesn't make sense. Marcus's hands were shaking now. Can you check with Dr. Webb? Please. Richard disappeared for 20 minutes before returning with Dr. Webb himself. The doctor was tall and distinguished, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He projected an aura of competence and compassion that had made him beloved in the community. Mr. Washington, I'm so sorry for the confusion. Your wife never arrived for her appointment. We waited until 3 o'clock, then moved on to our next patient. Sometimes, especially this late in pregnancy, women get nervous and decide to postpone. She wouldn't do that, Marcus insisted. Keisha loves these appointments. She talks about them for days afterward. Something's wrong. Dr. Webb placed a reassuring hand on Marcus's shoulder. I understand your concern. Why don't we reschedule for tomorrow? I'm sure there's a simple explanation. But Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened. He spent the next 3 hours searching the hospital from top to bottom, checking every waiting room, every bathroom, every exit. Security guards grew annoyed with his persistence, finally escorting him from the building at 8 p.m. He drove home to their empty house, calling Keisha's mother, her sister, her best friends. No one had heard from her. By midnight, Marcus called the Detroit Police Department to report his wife missing. Detective Maria Santos had been with the Detroit PD for 12 years, specializing in missing persons cases. She'd seen too many women disappear, especially women of color whose cases didn't generate media attention or police urgency. But something about Marcus Washington's anguish convinced her that Keisha hadn't left voluntarily. Tell me about your marriage, Detective Santos said the next morning, sitting across from Marcus in the Stark police station interview room. Any problems? Arguments? Financial stress? Marcus's eyes filled with tears. We've been trying to have this baby for 3 years. 3 miscarriages nearly broke us, but we got through it together. Keisha was so excited about this pregnancy. She'd been planning the nursery since the day we found out. Santos made notes. In her experience, domestic violence often escalated during pregnancy, but Marcus showed no signs of being an abuser. His grief appeared genuine, his concern focused entirely on finding Keisha and their unborn child. What about Dr. Webb? Any concerns about him or the hospital? None, Marcus said immediately. Keisha loved Dr. Webb, said he was the first doctor who really listened to her concerns, who made her feel respected. Our friend Jasmine recommended him. Santos's investigation began at Riverside Medical Center, where she immediately encountered resistance. Hospital administrator Patricia Coleman, a sharp-faced woman in her 40s, cited patient privacy laws when Santos requested security footage. Even to investigate a missing person, Santos pressed. Especially then, Coleman replied smoothly. If Mrs. Washington chose to leave, that's her right. We can't violate her privacy by showing her movements within our facility. The stonewalling continued with Dr. Webb, who repeated his claim that Keisha never arrived for her appointment. His appointment book showed the 2:15 slot marked as no-show, with the next patient seen at 2:45. It happens more often than you'd think, Doctor, Webb explained, his voice filled with practiced sympathy. Pregnancy can cause anxiety, especially for first-time mothers. Sometimes they need time to process their fears. But when Santos interviewed the hospital receptionist who'd been working that day, the story changed. Margaret Henley, Richard's wife, Santos noted, now claims she distinctly remembered Keisha arriving for her appointment. Beautiful young woman, wearing purple, very pregnant. I personally walked her to the maternity ward waiting area around 2:20. I assumed she'd been seen by Dr. Webb. The contradiction was glaring, but Dr. Webb held firm to his story. Santos requested the security footage from the maternity ward, only to be told it had been accidentally recycled due to a computer glitch. As the investigation progressed, Santos encountered obstacle after obstacle. Key hospital staff members suddenly became unavailable for interviews. The security guard who'd been on duty that day took early retirement and moved to Florida within a week of Keisha's disappearance. The nurse who typically assisted Dr. Webb transferred to a hospital in Ohio. Most frustrating was the hospital's legal team, led by attorney Jonathan Cross, who seemed to anticipate every investigative move. When Santos obtained a warrant for Keisha's medical records, Cross filed injunctions. When she requested interviews with other patients seen that day, privacy concerns were raised. "It's like they're protecting something," Santos confided to her partner, Detective Robert Kim. "But without evidence of foul play, my hands are tied." The media showed little interest in Keisha's disappearance. The Detroit Free Press ran a small article on page 6. "Pregnant woman missing after hospital visit." Local TV news mentioned it briefly, between weather and sports. In contrast, when a white woman from the suburbs went missing the same month, it dominated headlines for weeks. Marcus felt the weight of systemic indifference crushing him. He took unpaid leave from Ford to conduct his own investigation, spending his savings on private investigators who hit the same walls Santos had encountered. The most promising lead came from Jasmine Thompson, who revealed troubling information about her own experience with Dr. Webb. During her pregnancy with twins, she'd been scheduled for several unusual tests that other doctors later told her were unnecessary. "He kept saying my babies were at risk, that he needed to monitor them closely," Jasmine told Marcus. "I had to come in twice a week during my last month. Some of the tests weren't even in my medical records when I requested them later." But when Santos tried to interview Jasmine officially, she recanted her story, claiming she'd been mistaken or confused. Marcus suspected someone had gotten to her, but couldn't prove it. Months turned to years. Marcus couldn't afford to keep the private investigators, but he never stopped searching. He plastered Keisha's photo throughout Detroit, organized volunteer search parties, appeared on local talk shows begging for information. The nursery remained exactly as Keisha had left it. Yellow walls with dancing teddy bear borders, a changing table stocked with diapers and baby clothes, a mobile that played Brahms' Lullaby when wound. Marcus couldn't bring himself to change anything. His mother, Ruth Washington, moved in to help during the worst months when Marcus barely ate or slept. She'd find him at 3 a.m. sitting in the nursery, holding tiny onesies and crying. "Baby, you got to eat," Ruth would say, bringing him soup and cornbread. "Keisha wouldn't want you wasting away." But Marcus felt like half of his soul had been ripped away. He returned to work at Ford, but co-workers noticed the change. The laughing, joking man who'd been so excited about becoming a father had become withdrawn and hollow-eyed. Dorothy Williams, Keisha's mother, handled her grief differently. She threw herself into organizing community awareness about missing Black women, partnering with other families who'd lost daughters and wives to indifference and inadequate investigations. "The police give up too easy when it's our girls," Dorothy said during a community meeting at Mount Olive Baptist Church. "We got to keep searching ourselves, keep their names alive." Years passed. Marcus never remarried, never even dated. He wore his wedding ring like a talisman, convinced that Keisha was still alive somewhere, needing him to find her. Friends gently suggested grief counseling, but Marcus insisted that accepting Keisha's death would be giving up hope. By 2005, Detective Santos had been promoted to sergeant and transferred to robbery homicide. Keisha Washington's case file gathered dust in the cold case division, one of hundreds of unsolved disappearances that haunted the Detroit Police Department. New detectives occasionally reviewed the file, but the trail had gone cold years earlier. Hospital records were sealed by ongoing litigation. Key witnesses had disappeared or died. Dr. Webb had retired from Riverside Medical Center in 2001, moving to a gated community in Scottsdale, Arizona. Marcus, now in his 40s, had developed a routine that kept him sane. Every Sunday after church, he'd visit the cemetery where they'd reserved plots for their family. He'd sit by the empty space next to where his parents would eventually be buried, talking to Keisha about his week, about the dreams he'd had where she came home. "I saw the baby in my dream last night," he'd tell her gravestone marker, placed there despite having no body to bury. "A little girl who looked just like you. She was calling for her daddy." The dreams were both blessing and curse, keeping Keisha alive in his heart while torturing him with what he'd lost. Some mornings he'd wake up reaching for her, momentarily forgetting that she'd been gone for over a decade. In 2015, advances in DNA technology and cold case investigation techniques brought renewed hope to families of missing persons. The Detroit Police Department, under pressure from community activists led by Dorothy Williams, established a dedicated cold case unit with advanced technological resources. Detective James Park, a Korean-American investigator known for his meticulous attention to detail, was assigned to review unsolved cases from the 1990s. Keisha Washington's file caught his attention immediately, not because of the case details, but because of the pattern he recognized. Cross-referencing missing persons reports from the same time period, Park identified 17 other cases with disturbing similarities. All involved pregnant women in their third trimester. All had last been seen at medical appointments. All were women of color from working-class families. All had disappeared without a trace. With minimal media coverage, Park's investigation revealed that 12 of these women had been patients of doctors who trained under or worked with Dr. Harrison Webb at some point in their careers. The pattern was too significant to be coincidental. Working with FBI analysts, Park mapped the network of medical professionals connected to these disappearances. The web extended across multiple states, involving hospitals, clinics, and adoption agencies that operated in legal gray areas. Chapter 9: The Breakthrough. In 2018, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Patricia Kelman, now 71 and suffering from pancreatic cancer, contacted Park through her attorney. She'd worked as Dr. Webb's head nurse for 15 years, from 1985 to 2000. "I've been carrying this secret for 25 years, she said during their first meeting, her voice weak but determined. "I'm dying, and I can't meet my maker with this on my conscience." Kelman's confession was devastating. Dr. Webb had been running an illegal operation within Riverside Medical Center, targeting pregnant women who fit specific criteria: healthy, without extensive family support, carrying babies that would be valuable in the black market adoption trade. "He told us we were helping desperate families," Kelman explained, tears streaming down her face. "Couples who couldn't have children naturally, who would give these babies loving homes. But I knew, God help me, I knew what really happened to the mothers." The operation had multiple components. Women were drugged during routine appointments, then taken to a hidden surgical suite within the hospital. Babies were delivered and immediately transferred to a network of buyers who paid enormous sums for healthy infants. Mothers who survived the forced delivery were held until they could be disposed of safely. Keisha Washington's name was in Kelman's records. According to Kelman's detailed confession, Keisha had arrived for her appointment as scheduled on October 15, 1993. She'd been taken to Dr. Webb's office, where she was given what she believed was a routine injection of vitamins. "She was so trusting," Kelman sobbed. She thanked Dr. Webb for taking such good care of her baby. She had no idea what was happening until it was too late. Within minutes, Keisha had lost consciousness. She was moved to the hidden surgical suite, where Dr. Webb performed an emergency C-section. The baby, a girl, survived and was immediately handed over to a waiting couple who'd paid $150,000 for a healthy black infant. But Keisha had complications during surgery. Blood loss, infection, and trauma from the unsterile conditions led to her death within hours of the procedure. Dr. Webb was furious, Kelman recalled. Not because Mrs. Washington died, but because her death made disposal more complicated. Living women could be convinced they'd signed adoption papers while drugged. Dead women left evidence. Keisha's body was dissolved in industrial acid in the hospital's basement maintenance area. Her remains were disposed of through the hospital's medical waste system, incinerated along with surgical refuse. Marcus Washington's daughter had lived. For 28 years, she'd been raised by wealthy parents in Grosse Pointe who believed they'd adopted her legally. They'd named her Madison Cross after the attorney who'd arranged the adoption. Chapter 11. The Network Exposed. Kelman's confession opened floodgates of evidence that had been buried for decades. FBI raids on storage facilities rented by hospital personnel uncovered boxes of false documents, medical records, and financial transactions detailing the scope of the operation. The network had operated from 1978 to 2001, involving multiple hospitals across Michigan, Ohio, and Illinois. Over 300 pregnant women had been victimized, with nearly 400 babies sold to buyers who paid between $50,000 and $200,000 depending on the child's race, health, and physical characteristics. Hospital Administrator Patricia Coleman had been the operations financial coordinator, managing payments and maintaining false records. Security Supervisor Richard Henley, whose wife Margaret worked reception, ensured surveillance footage was destroyed and witnesses were silenced or relocated. Dr. Webb had been the medical leader, but he wasn't working alone. 7 other physicians were involved, along with dozens of nurses, technicians, and administrative staff. The operation generated over $85 million in profits over 23 years. Most shocking was the discovery of a nursery within the hidden wing, where premature babies were kept alive until they could be delivered to buyers. Some mothers had been kept in medical comas for weeks, their pregnancies artificially extended to improve their babies' survival rates. The most delicate aspect of the investigation was locating and identifying the children who'd been sold. DNA databases, adoption records, and financial traces helped investigators piece together the network of buyers and their purchased children. Madison Cross had grown up in a loving home with parents who genuinely believed they'd adopted her legally. Thomas and Margaret Cross, no relation to attorney Jonathan Cross, were a wealthy white couple who'd struggled with infertility for years before adopting Madison through what they thought was a private agency. Now 28 years old, Madison was a pediatric nurse at Children's Hospital of Michigan, ironically following her birth mother's calling to care for others. She'd grown up knowing she was adopted, but her adoptive parents had no knowledge of the illegal circumstances surrounding her placement. Detective Park faced the heartbreaking task of informing both Madison and Marcus that they were daughter and father. The revelation would destroy Madison's understanding of her identity, while potentially giving Marcus the closure he'd sought for 3 decades. Marcus Washington was 62 years old when Detective Park called him on a cold Tuesday morning in January 2024. The phone rang while Marcus was getting ready for his shift at Ford, where he'd worked for 41 years, never missing a day that wasn't absolutely necessary. "Mr. Washington, this is Detective Park with the Detroit Police Cold Case Unit. I need to speak with you about your wife Keisha's case." Marcus's hands began shaking. He'd received similar calls over the years, false leads, mistaken identities, cruel hoaxes, but something in Detective Park's voice was different. "We've made arrests in connection with your wife's disappearance, and Mr. Washington, we found your daughter." The words didn't compute at first. Marcus sat down heavily on his kitchen chair, the same one where he'd eaten breakfast alone for 31 years. "My daughter, her name is Madison Cross. She's 28 years old, healthy, and living in Detroit. She's been looking for her birth family for years, not knowing the truth about how she was separated from them." The meeting was arranged for the following Saturday at the police station, with counselors present to help both Marcus and Madison process the traumatic revelations. Marcus spent the week in a daze, unable to focus on work, unable to sleep, alternating between joy and rage. His daughter was alive. Keisha had died, but their baby had survived and grown into a woman. The little girl he'd dreamed about, the child whose nursery he'd preserved like a shrine, was real and living just 20 minutes from his house. Madison Cross arrived at the police station on Saturday morning with her adoptive parents, who'd insisted on supporting her through the ordeal. She was tall like Marcus, with Keisha's expressive eyes and gentle smile. She worked as a pediatric nurse, caring for sick children with the same compassion her birth mother had shown her students. The most delicate aspect of the investigation was locating and identifying the children who'd been sold. DNA databases, adoption records, and financial traces helped investigators piece together the network of buyers and their purchased children. Madison Cross had grown up in a loving home with parents who genuinely believed they'd adopted her legally. Thomas and Margaret Cross, no relation to attorney Jonathan Cross, were a wealthy white couple who'd struggled with infertility for years before adopting Madison through what they thought was a private agency. Now 28 years old, Madison was a pediatric nurse at Children's Hospital of Michigan, ironically following her birth mother's calling to care for others. She'd grown up knowing she was adopted, but her adoptive parents had no knowledge of the illegal circumstances surrounding her placement. Detective Park faced the heartbreaking task of informing both Madison and Marcus that they were daughter and father. The revelation would destroy Madison's understanding of her identity, while potentially giving Marcus the closure he'd sought for 3 decades. Marcus Washington was 62 years old when Detective Park called him on a cold Tuesday morning in January 2024. The phone rang while Marcus was getting ready for his shift at Ford, where he'd worked for 41 years, never missing a day that wasn't absolutely necessary. "Mr. Washington, this is Detective Park with the Detroit Police Cold Case Unit. I need to speak with you about your wife Keisha's case." Marcus's hands began shaking. He'd received similar calls over the years: false leads, mistaken identities, cruel hoaxes. But something in Detective Park's voice was different. "We've made arrests in connection with your wife's disappearance. And Mr. Washington, we found your daughter." The words didn't compute at first. Marcus sat down heavily on his kitchen chair, the same one where he'd eaten breakfast alone for 31 years. "My daughter, her name is Madison Cross. She's 28 years old, healthy, and living in Detroit. She's been looking for her birth family for years, not knowing the truth about how she was separated from them." The meeting was arranged for the following Saturday at the police station, with counselors present to help both Marcus and Madison process the traumatic revelations. Marcus spent the week in a daze, unable to focus on work, unable to sleep, alternating between joy and rage. His daughter was alive. Keisha had died, but their baby had survived and grown into a woman. The little girl he'd dreamed about, the child whose nursery he'd preserved like a shrine, was real and living just 20 minutes from his house. Madison Cross arrived at the police station on Saturday morning with her adoptive parents, who'd insisted on supporting her through the ordeal. She was tall like Marcus, with Keisha's expressive eyes and gentle smile. She worked as a pediatric nurse, caring for sick children with the same compassion her birth mother had shown her students. The trial of Dr. Harrison Webb became a media sensation, finally giving voice to the victims whose disappearances had been ignored for decades. Marcus Washington sat in the front row every day, often holding hands with Madison, who'd taken leave from her job to attend the proceedings. Prosecutor Angela Mitchell presented overwhelming evidence of the conspiracy, including financial records, medical documents, and testimony from surviving victims who'd been kept in the hidden wing but managed to escape or survive their ordeals. One witness, Carmen Rodriguez, had been held for 6 weeks in 1995 after giving birth to twins. She'd pretended to be more heavily sedated than she actually was, memorizing details about the facility and the people who ran it. "I heard babies crying all night," Rodriguez testified. "They had a nursery with 20 or 30 cribs. Some of the babies were so small, born too early. The nurses called it the inventory." Webb's defense attorney argued that his client was simply helping childless couples and providing medical care to women who couldn't afford it otherwise. The argument fell apart under the weight of evidence showing the murders, the forgeries, and the millions of dollars in profits. As the investigation expanded, more families came forward with stories of missing pregnant relatives. The case had broken open not just Webb's network, but similar operations in other parts of the country. Dorothy Williams, Keisha's mother, had become a nationally recognized advocate for missing women of color. At age 78, she testified before Congress about the need for better investigation protocols and media attention for victims from marginalized communities. "My daughter was beautiful, educated, loved," Dorothy told the congressional committee. "But when she disappeared, the world barely noticed. How many other Keishas are out there, forgotten by a system that doesn't value their lives?" DNA testing had reunited 12 other families with children who'd been sold through Webb's network. The stories were heartbreaking: fathers who'd spent decades searching, siblings who'd grown up knowing they had a missing brother or sister somewhere, grandparents who'd died never knowing their grandchildren were alive. But not all the reunions were happy. Some of the stolen children had been raised in abusive homes, sold to buyers who wanted them for exploitation rather than love. Some had died young, victims of neglect or violence at the hands of their purchasers. Dr. Harrison Webb was convicted on 127 counts of murder, kidnapping, human trafficking, and racketeering. At age 78, he received 12 consecutive life sentences, ensuring he would die in prison. During his sentencing hearing, Webb finally showed emotion, not remorse for his victims, but anger at being caught. "I provided a service," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "Those women would have had children they couldn't afford to raise properly. I gave those babies better lives." Marcus Washington was allowed to give a victim impact statement. Standing at the podium, looking directly at the man who'd murdered his wife and sold his daughter, he spoke with quiet dignity. "You took everything from me," Marcus said. "My wife, my child, 31 years of being a father. You destroyed families for money, treating babies like commodities and mothers like livestock. But you didn't win. Love won. Truth won. My daughter and I found each other, and Keisha's memory lives on through her." The other conspirators received sentences ranging from 15 years to life. Patricia Coleman, who'd managed the financial aspects of the operation, received 45 years. The Henleys each got 25 years for their roles in covering up the crimes. Riverside Medical Center had been demolished in January 2024, with the Hidden Wings discovery leading to the arrests. The site became a memorial garden dedicated to all the victims of the medical conspiracy, with Keisha Washington's name prominently displayed among the 127 confirmed victims. Marcus finally had closure, but the grief remained. Madison was wonderful, kind, intelligent, and eager to learn about the mother she'd never known. But 31 years of loss couldn't be erased by her presence. "I'm grateful every day that she's alive," Marcus told a reporter, "but I'll never stop missing Keisha. I'll never stop wondering what our life would have been like if she'd come home that day." Madison struggled with survivors' guilt and identity questions. Learning that her birth mother had been murdered so she could be sold created psychological trauma that required extensive therapy. But she also felt a profound connection to Marcus and to Keisha's memory. She moved into the house where her parents had lived, sleeping in the nursery that Marcus had preserved for 31 years. Surrounded by the teddy bears and baby clothes her birth mother had chosen, Madison felt close to the woman who died bringing her into the world. The Keisha Washington case led to federal legislation requiring better tracking of missing persons, particularly pregnant women and women of color. The Keisha Washington Act mandated that hospitals maintain surveillance footage for minimum periods and report suspicious patterns in patient disappearances. Dorothy Williams established the Keisha Washington Foundation, providing resources for families of missing women and advocating for improved investigation protocols. The foundation helped locate 17 additional missing persons in its first 2 years of operation. Marcus retired from Ford after 43 years, dedicating his time to the foundation and to building a relationship with Madison. They took trips together to the places Keisha had loved, to the church where she'd grown up, to the cemetery where her memorial stone marked an empty grave. Madison pursued additional medical training, specializing in obstetrics and gynecology. "I want to help bring babies into the world safely," she explained, "the way my mother should have been helped." She also changed her name legally, becoming Madison Washington Cross, honoring both the parents who'd raised her and the father who'd never stopped searching for her. As of 2024, investigators continue to identify victims of Dr. Webb's network and similar operations across the country. Advanced DNA testing and database cross-referencing have reunited over 40 families with children who'd been stolen and sold. Marcus Washington, now 63, tends the memorial garden every morning before going to the foundation offices. He talks to Keisha's memorial stone, updating her on Madison's life, on the justice that finally came, on the love that survived 3 decades of separation. "She would be so proud of Madison," Marcus tells visitors to the memorial. "Our daughter became everything Keisha dreamed she would be: kind, strong, dedicated to helping others. Evil tried to destroy our family, but love was stronger." The yellow nursery in Marcus's house has been transformed into Madison's childhood room, filled with photos and mementos from her life with the Cross family. But Keisha's presence remains in the mobile that still plays Brahms' lullaby, in the teddy bear border on the walls, in the love that refused to die despite 31 years of silence. Some mysteries are never solved. Some missing persons are never found. But sometimes love is strong enough to bridge decades of darkness, bringing families back together and ensuring that truth, like justice, eventually finds its way home. Keisha Washington was 8 months pregnant when she walked into Riverside Medical Center on October 15th, 1993. She never walked out, but her story and her daughter's survival reminds us that even in the darkest places, hope can survive. Even after 31 years, love can find a way home. This case shows us that evil can hide behind the most innocent facades, and that sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the darkest secrets. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more true crime content and let me know in the comments what case you'd like me to investigate next. Until then, stay safe out there.